Good news, everyone. I can still see myself in the mirror. So that thing about modern mirrors being able to reflect vampires is true, I guess. Richmond Reed Carradine was born in New York City in 1906. He was the son of William Reed Carradine, who worked as a correspondent for the Associated Press, and Dr. Genevieve Winifred Richmond, who was a surgeon. Richmond Reed Carradine's grandfather on his father's side was Beverly Carradine, an American Methodist minister and holiness movement evangelist who was famous for his writings on faith. William Reed Carradine would pass from tuberculosis when Richmond was only 2 years old, and his mother would remarry a paper manufacturer from Philadelphia, who subjected Richmond to harsh physical punishments for minor infractions. Richmond Reed Carradine would study sculpture at Philadelphia's Graphic Arts Institute and moved to Richmond, Virginia to apprentice under Daniel Chester French, famous for having sculpted the statue of Abraham Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial. He studied hard, and after leaving the apprenticeship, he supported himself using his art skills by doing portraits on the street. Carradine would later say that if someone liked their portrait, he would sell it to them for $2.50. But if they complained about it, he would charge them $10 or $15. During this time period, he would be arrested for vagrancy and wind up with a broken nose that was not correctly set. While Carradine had trained in the visual arts, he wanted to be an actor from the moment that he saw a production of The Merchant of Venice at 11 years old. In 1925, he was cast in a production of Camille in New Orleans, and in 1927, he took a job escorting a shipment of bananas across the country to Los Angeles, with no plans or particular desire to make the return trip. He started auditioning for stage shows under the name Peter Richmond, which was the name of a favorite uncle with whom he had lived for a while in New York City. His break into the film world came when he was hired by Cecil B. DeMille to design sets. According to Carradine, DeMille fired him after only 2 weeks, but the director had heard Carradine reciting the gravedigger's role from Hamlet and told him to report back the next day to record voiceovers for his current production. Carradine would become a member of DeMille's stock company and would record voiceovers for many of his films. His first on-screen credit would be in 1930, although Carradine claimed that he had already appeared in 70 movies prior to that without having been credited. He also claimed to have auditioned against Conrad Veidt for the role of Dracula that would ultimately go to Bela Lugosi. But there is no record of his having done so, and at the time, he was still a relative unknown in film, not exactly the sort of person Universal was auditioning. He would also claim to have auditioned for the role of Frankenstein's monster that ultimately went to Boris Karloff, but again, no documentation or personal accounts corroborate the story. In 1933, he changed his stage name to John Peter Richmond, and in 1935, he changed it once more to John Carradine. He would also adopt the name legally in 1937. Carradine's work picked up steam starting in 1936, as he became a part of director John Ford's stock company, appearing in 11 films for the director, including The Grapes of Wrath and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Regardless of whether or not he had auditioned for the role back in the early 30s, Carradine would wind up playing Dracula as Lugosi's replacement at Universal for the movies House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula. He was a frequent player on stage and in touring companies, and from the late 1940s onward, he would use his star status to get a string of roles in low-budget horror films that helped him finance his own classical theater company. Starting in 1947, he was also a frequent guest star in television, appearing in Johnny Ringo, Maverick, The Rebel, and Bonanza, as well as playing mortician Mr. Gateman on The Monsters. His last filmed screen appearances were in a 1986 episode of The Twilight Zone and the 1986 movie Peggy Sue Got Married. Although several years after his death, the movie Bikini Drive-In, for which he had filmed a number of scenes, would be released, officially becoming his last credited original role.
I will protect the earth upon which you lie, so that before sunrise, your coffin will always be ready for you.
For that, I will do whatever you wish.
If you accept that the Universal monsters were the original cinematic universe, and why wouldn't you, 1944's House of Frankenstein acts as its Avengers. There had already been crossover events within the franchise, in particular, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, whose events are built upon for this movie's story. But this was the first big sneeze of the monsters, bringing together a handful of characters and their storylines in a single film. Originally, Universal had announced that the monsters would come together in a film called Chamber of Horrors, with even more monsters and more stars. But that movie was canceled before entering production. Instead, Universal moved forward with House of Frankenstein, that brings together Frankenstein, the Wolfman, a facsimile of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Dracula. The screenplay, originally entitled The Devil's Brood, came from a story by Kurt Siodmak. Siodmak had previously written the screenplay for Invisible Agent, and was a popular science fiction novelist whose works included Black Friday and Donovan's Brain, the later of which would be adapted in the same year that House of Frankenstein was released, under the title The Lady and the Monster. But Siodmak was reluctant to accept any credit for the House of Frankenstein, telling the authors of 1990's Universal Horrors, "I only wrote the story. I didn't write the script. I never saw the picture." Instead, the bulk of the writing was done by Edward T. Lowe, Jr., The Nashville, Tennessee native was born in 1880. He had previously written screenplays for 1923's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1933's The Vampire Bat, and installments in the Charlie Chan, Sherlock Holmes, and Bulldog Drummond franchises. In a career that ran from 1912 to 1947, he wrote over 120 screenplays, including both House of Frankenstein and its follow-up the next year, House of Dracula. The film suffered from the beginning with production delays. In particular, Universal wanted to make sure that the film included Boris Karloff, who, in addition to having a 2-movie contract with the studio, had been the original Frankenstein's monster and also had played Dr. Gustav Niemann in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Boris Karloff, however, was playing in the touring company of Arsenic and Old Lace, in the role of Jonathan Brewster, a role which had been written specifically with Karloff in mind.
You shouldn't have killed him just because he knows something about us. What happens?
We come to him for help and he tries to shake us down. Besides, he said I looked like Boris Karloff.
Production on the film was delayed to allow Karloff to finish his obligation to the tour and be able to return to shoot this new film for Universal. Unfortunately, this wound up losing the production a fairly significant cast member. Bela Lugosi had agreed to reprise his role as Dracula for the first time since 1931's production. A major event, seeing that this was also the first time Universal had asked him to reprise the role. But when production was delayed, Lugosi had started looking for other work to fill the gap. And he found it, replacing Boris Karloff as Jonathan Brewster for the remainder of Arsenic and Old Lace's tour. Universal did not want to delay the movie any further, so the role of Dracula fell into new hands, those of John Carradine. The film was budgeted at $354,000, the equivalent of $5.5 million today. It was scheduled for 30 days of filming, and in order to save money, it reused sets from the films Green Hell, Pittsburgh, Gung Ho, and Tower of London. Because they required major action pieces and some locations that would only be seen once in the movie, all of the scenes featuring Dracula were put on the shooting schedule last.
It is the bond that links us together.
I see your world more clearly now. I'm no longer afraid.
I will come for you.
As the movie opens, Dr. Neiman escapes from prison with his cellmate and new assistant, Daniel. Daniel fills the role of the Igor-like henchman, but also pulls double duty as a proxy for the Hunchback of Notre Dame, reflected in his physical deformity and his unrequited love for the Romani girl Ilanka. When they kill a traveling carny and take his wagon, they find themselves in possession of Dracula's skeleton, which turns out to be the real deal, as removing the stake from between the skeleton's ribs causes Dracula to spring instantly back to life, now in possession of a snazzy mustache. Thinking quickly, Neiman offers to protect Dracula's coffin for him in exchange for Dracula helping him to take vengeance on the men who sent him to prison. Carradine's Dracula lacks the old-world nobility of Lugosi's, but he has the physicality. Tall and lean, he has a commanding presence that suggests quiet physical strength, but I can't deny that Carradine seems to bring a little bit of his Western acting with him. Dracula doesn't exactly swagger, but there's something very high noon about his physicality, and when he takes to the hills to try to escape his pursuers, it feels like an Old West gun battle, with Dracula diving for his coffin the way a Hollywood gunfighter would dive for cover. As you may have noticed, Carradine had a flair for self-aggrandizement. Much of what we know about his young life comes either directly from him or from his son David, who presumably heard these stories as a child. Peter Coe, who plays the young Carl Hussman in House of Frankenstein, recalled that playing opposite Carradine was a bit of a chore, saying that Carradine was always trying to find ways to upstage all of the other actors and to steal every scene in which he appeared. It reached the point that Coe actually threatened Carradine with physical violence if it happened again. And after that, he said, John Carradine became much more cooperative and professional. Elena Verdugo, who plays the Romani dancer Ilanka, had a long and storied career in entertainment and is most recognized by members of the baby boom generation for her role as Consuelo Lopez in Marcus Welby, M.D., for which she was nominated twice for an Emmy and won an Image Award. But it's also worth noting that her family had, at one time, owned a lot of property in California, including the property where Universal Studios sat and still sits to this day. In the 1940s, she was frequently called upon to appear in Universal movies, but the studio would never offer her an ongoing contract because she refused their demand to lose weight. She received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for her work in television in 1960, and if you're in Los Angeles, you can find it at 1709 Vine Street. So tell me, what do you think of John Carradine's turn playing Dracula for Universal? That's what the comments are for. You can drop down there and let me know your thoughts. There's also like and subscribe and a bell you can ring in order to get notifications every time there's a new video on the channel. And there's also a share button so you can share this with your friends and followers. Until next time, I am Glenn Williams, the Film Optimist, reminding you to watch like it means something.